You are in the first tab for Section 8. You are in tab 8.1. Notice to the right there is tab 8.2. In this section, you will enter occupational exposure limits, also known as OELs, which are the maximum safe exposure limits for workers. These are typically for airborne exposure, such as volatile liquids, aerosols, dusts, and powders. You are required to include exposure limits for all chemicals listed in Section 3, and possibly even include ingredients which are not listed, i.e., which are below the cutoff limit, but which could result in a hazardous exposure. As a reminder, we are creating an SDS of a corrosive cleaning product where we started with a SDS template for corrosive cleaners. So some of the text is already present. In addition, you will notice that in the exposure limit table, there is already the exposure limits for dichloromethane. This is because it was added as a component in Section 3. Also, as a reminder, the exposure limits are present in the underlying substance record, which is linked. So for dichloromethane, to open the underlying substance record, click on Link, List SDS Components. You will see that we have dichloromethane, and also there's another ingredient which was added, but we'll double-click dichloromethane. We are now in the substance record. We will go into the exposure limits, and this is essentially the underlying exposure limit table, and you'll notice these very same exposure limits were brought into the safety data sheet when we entered the component dichloromethane. We will close this record. And now we will need to add the exposure limits for the other component, which was the sodium metasilicate pentahydrate. So click on the Add button, and we see that it's already listed here. We'll select it. It's been added to the table. For those chemicals without exposure limits, you are still required to enter not applicable in the exposure limit table. This will let people know that although there is a hazardous chemical ingredient, there are no occupational exposure limits for that. To the left of the table are tools for adding exposure limits to the table, copying, updating exposure limits, and even finding new exposure limits. Let's continue. Appropriate engineering controls is burgundy colored, so this is a required field. We have obtained text from the SDS template. We will keep that text for this example. We will now proceed with the eye and face protection. So let's go ahead and let's display the hazards by clicking on Control 8. And again, this displays the hazards of the product, and the other way to display these is under the Help, Show Hazards, and again the shortcuts are listed to the right. So we'll keep that open, and so we are now going to click into our template, and we'll click on the magnifying, zoom English, and again clicking on the zoom allows us to see and edit a larger amount of text. It's a little bit easier to do the editing. So we have in this particular template text relating to the eye damage. So we have a carcinogen 2, eye damage 1, skin corrosion 1B. So that eye damage 1 is the hazard class. So what we'll do is we will delete the classification and the text that relates to class 3. This is all the class 2, 2A, 2B, and we'll keep the text that relates to the eye class 1. We actually have several variations that we can choose from. We'll just go ahead, just for sake of argument, we'll select the last item, or the last bit of text. This is a little bit more conservative. This essentially requires that we have tight-fitting safety goggles and also that an eye wash station or shower is nearby when working with the concentrated product. This is a bit of a conservative statement, but some companies like to be a little bit more conservative, so we'll include that version. And then for the skin protection, we have a skin corrosion 1B, so again, click on the magnifying, zoom English, and here we actually just have two variations. We'll use the first one. Again, we're just sort of keeping this, the beauty of the templates is they provide language for you that, again, you might decide to use. You might, of course, decide to create your own template or edit templates that we've provided. So the next section is section 8.2. Again, we could go there by clicking on the top or under navigation, select 8.2.